The allure of Hollywood has always been undeniable. From the golden age of the 1950s to the cultural explosion of the 1990s, the American film and television industry created myths, turned unknowns into stars, and delivered stories that moved generations across the globe. Yet behind the cameras, not everything was glamour and success. The same machine that builds fame can also expose vulnerabilities, open the door to hidden dangers, and at times, lead to tragedies that leave lasting scars. Among countless names that graced the screens, some are remembered not only for their performances or charisma, but also for the tragic circumstances that ended their lives. Over the decades, Hollywood's history has been marked by losses that shocked not just families and friends, but also millions of fans who followed these artists with admiration and hope. Three stories in particular stand out as haunting reminders of how fragile the line between stardom and vulnerability can be. Sharon Tate, Rebecca Schaeffer, and Phil Hartman. Each one lived in a different era, in a different stage of their careers. Yet all three share the same heartbreaking fate. Lives and dreams cut short, leaving behind legacies overshadowed by tragedy. Sharon Tate, a promising young actress of the 1960s, became an unwilling icon of one of the decade's most horrifying crimes, when the so-called Manson family carried out a brutal act that stunned the world. Decades later, in 1989, rising star Rebecca Schaeffer was murdered by a stalker at her own doorstep, a tragedy that would spark new laws and reforms around celebrity protection and anti-stalking legislation. And in 1998, beloved comedian and actor Phil Hartman, known for his sharp humor and unforgettable presence on television, lost his life in a shocking incident within his own home. This documentary-style narrative will revisit the journeys of these three figures, their dreams, their achievements, and the circumstances that led to their untimely deaths. Beyond their stories, we also uncover what these events revealed about the darker side of fame, and how they reshaped Hollywood's understanding of safety, vulnerability, and the real cost of stardom. In the vibrant world of 1960s Hollywood, Sharon Tate embodied the image of a rising star. Born on January 24, 1943, in Dallas, Texas, Tate spent much of her youth moving from city to city due to her father's military career. Despite the constant relocations, her striking beauty and natural charisma quickly drew attention, leading her toward modeling and eventually to acting. By the mid-1960s, Sharon had begun carving out her place in the entertainment industry. She appeared in television shows such as The Beverly Hillbillies and soon transitioned into film roles. Her breakthrough came with the 1967 film Valley of the Dolls, where her performance earned her a Golden Globe nomination. Critics and fans alike saw in Tate a future leading actress, someone capable of blending glamour with emotional depth on screen. Off-screen, her life seemed equally charmed. Sharon married acclaimed director Roman Polanski in 1968, and the two quickly became one of Hollywood's most talked-about couples. Together, they represented a new wave of cinema, blending European artistry with American star power. By 1969, Sharon was 8.5 months pregnant with their first child, a period that should have been filled with anticipation and joy. But the late 1960s were also a time of cultural turbulence in America. Against a backdrop of countercultural movements, protests, and generational clashes, darker undercurrents emerged. Among these was the so-called Manson family, a cult-like group led by Charles Manson, whose distorted beliefs and violent impulses would leave an indelible stain on American history. On the night of August 8, 1969, Sharon Tate was at her home on Cielo Drive in Los Angeles, accompanied by friends Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, and Wojciech Frykowski. Roman Polanski was away in Europe at the time. In the early hours of August 9th, members of the Manson family broke into the house. What followed was an act of violence so senseless and shocking that it became one of the darkest moments in Hollywood's history. Sharon Tate, at just 26 years old, and her unborn child were among the victims. News of the tragedy stunned the world. Hollywood was shaken to its core, as fans and fellow actors struggled to process the brutality that had claimed the life of such a promising star. The crime didn't just devastate Sharon's family and loved ones, it also became a grim cultural marker, symbolizing the end of the carefree 1960s and the loss of innocence in an industry built on dreams. In the aftermath, the trial of Charles Manson and his followers dominated headlines, exposing the world to the disturbing ideology that fueled the murders. But beyond the courtroom drama and media frenzy, Sharon Tate's story remained at the heart of it all, a reminder of a young actress whose life and future were cruelly stolen. Sharon Tate's legacy today is remembered not just through her films, but through the enduring impact of her story. Her family, especially her sister Deborah Tate, would later dedicate themselves to preserving her memory and advocating for victims' rights. More than half a century later, Sharon Tate is still remembered as a symbol of unfulfilled promise, a star who shone brightly but far too briefly in the constellation of Hollywood. In the late 1980s, Rebecca Schaeffer was on the verge of a remarkable career. Born on November 6, 1967 in Eugene, Oregon, she was the only child of Benson and Dana Schaeffer. From a young age, Rebecca displayed a quiet determination and artistic sensitivity that set her apart. After high school, she briefly pursued modeling, even spending time in Japan to gain experience. But what she truly wanted was to act, and by her late teens, she was already moving toward that dream in Los Angeles. Her big break came when she landed the role of Patty Russell in the CBS sitcom My Sister Sam. Premiering in 1986, the show followed the story of a young teenager moving in with her older sister, played by Pam Dawber. Rebecca's natural charm, warmth, and relatability quickly made her a favorite with viewers. For a time, My Sister Sam seemed destined to become one of television's next great hits, and Rebecca herself was being recognized as one of Hollywood's most promising young actresses. Even after the show was cancelled in 1988, Rebecca's career showed no signs of slowing down. She secured auditions for major film roles, including a part in Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather Part III. Her talent, combined with her wholesome image, suggested a future filled with both television and cinematic success. But while her star was rising, Rebecca was also facing a danger that at the time was poorly understood: obsessive fans. One of them was Robert John Bardo, a young man from Arizona who had become fixated on her since her days on My Sister Sam. Over time, his admiration turned into an unhealthy obsession. Despite earlier attempts to meet her, he had been turned away by security at Warner Brothers Studios. Still, Bardo persisted, eventually tracking down her home, addressed through a private investigator, who had obtained it from California's Department of Motor Vehicles, something that would later spark national outrage. On the morning of July 18, 1989, Rebecca was at her apartment in West Hollywood when Bardo appeared at her door. She had just returned from preparing for an audition. At first, she spoke to him politely, but when he came back a second time, his behavior turned deadly. Rebecca Schaeffer was shot at the entrance of her own home. She was only 21 years old. The tragedy shocked Hollywood and the nation. How could such a promising career be cut short in such a senseless way and at such a young age? For many, it was a brutal awakening to the dangers of celebrity and the lack of protections available against stalkers at the time. Rebecca's death had lasting consequences beyond the grief of her family, friends, and fans. It became a catalyst for major reforms. California enacted its first anti-stalking laws in 1990, which would soon influence legislation across the United States. Additionally, access to personal information through the Department of Motor Vehicles was restricted, closing the loophole that had allowed Bardo to find her address. While her time in Hollywood was brief, Rebecca Schaeffer left a powerful legacy. She is remembered for her radiant presence, her talent, and the promise of what might have been. Her story continues to serve as a reminder of the importance of safety, privacy, and awareness in a world where fame can sometimes attract dangerous attention. By the 1990s, Phil Hartman had become one of the most beloved comedic performers in America. Born on September 24, 1948, in Brantford, Ontario, Canada, Phil moved with his family to the United States during childhood. He studied graphic arts in college and even worked as a freelance graphic designer before fully embracing a career in entertainment. His early days were spent with the famous improv group, The Groundlings in Los Angeles, where his sharp wit, versatile impressions, and impeccable comedic timing quickly set him apart. Hartman's big breakthrough came when he joined the cast of Saturday Night Live in 1986. Over 8 seasons, he became known as one of the show's most reliable and talented performers. Nicknamed the Glue by fellow cast members, Phil anchored sketches with his uncanny impressions of public figures like Bill Clinton, Ronald Reagan, and Frank Sinatra. His ability to fully transform into a character while delivering subtle humor made him an audience favorite. Beyond SNL, Hartman found success in film and television. He voiced iconic characters on The Simpsons, including Troy McClure and Lionel Hutz, whose quirky charm made them unforgettable. In the mid-1990s, he starred in the NBC sitcom News Radio, where his portrayal of the egotistical but hilarious anchor Bill McNeil became another career highlight. To fans and colleagues, Phil Hartman represented everything that made comedy both clever and timeless. But behind the success, Hartman's personal life was more complex. He was married 3 times, and his third marriage, to Bryn Omdahl, was often troubled. Friends would later describe Phil as a devoted father to his 2 children, and a man who tried to maintain stability at home, even as tensions rose. On May 28, 1998, tragedy struck. In the early hours of the morning, Bryn shot Phil in their Encino, California home. She later took her own life. Their 2 children, ages 6 and 9, were in the house at the time, but were unharmed. The news devastated Hollywood and the world of comedy. Phil Hartman was only 49 years old. The loss was felt deeply. Colleagues from SNL, The Simpsons, and News Radio paid tribute to him, remembering not only his immense talent, but also his kindness and professionalism. His death highlighted the struggles that can sometimes remain hidden behind the curtain of fame, reminding the world that even those who bring joy to millions can face private battles no one else sees. Phil Hartman's legacy lives on in the laughter he left behind. His work continues to be celebrated through reruns, compilations, and the voices of the characters he brought to life. More than 2 decades later, fans still remember him as one of comedy's true greats, a performer who elevated every project he touched and whose sudden loss left a void that has never truly been filled. The stories of Sharon Tate, Rebecca Schaeffer, and Phil Hartman remind us that fame, while dazzling, also carries risks. Each of these lives represents a different chapter in Hollywood's history. Tate's tragedy marked the end of the free-spirited 1960s. Schaeffer's murder exposed the dangers of unchecked obsession and led to legal reforms. Hartman's death revealed the fragility of life behind the spotlight, even for those who seemed to have it all. They were artists, dreamers, and people whose talent touched millions, and while their lives ended far too soon, their legacies continue to resonate, not only through their work, but through the changes their stories inspired in how Hollywood and society at large view safety, privacy, and the real human beings behind the celebrity image.